Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Kimberly Olson, licensed clinical psychologist. I want to take some time today to talk with you about something that is causing a lot of anguish in our culture, but we don't tend to talk a lot about it. And that's the topic of loneliness. Now, it seems like an odd topic, right? We all have social media. We are technically in some sort of communication with people a lot, but it doesn't seem to be of the real fulfilling variety. So let me go ahead and put up my slides and we shall talk. So how are we going to overcome this? But first of all, we need to figure out how we got here. Okay, so there's a couple of types of loneliness. Traditionally speaking, social loneliness was lacking a social network. And social networks, of course, are there for us to engage in activities or discussions. You don't necessarily have to be best buddies. It doesn't necessarily have to be an intimate relationship, but it would be somebody that you hang out with, right? A group of friends or colleagues. And social loneliness is pretty compelling. If you've ever been in a situation where you didn't have anybody to hang out with or do things with, you can certainly understand how that feels and that type of isolation and loneliness. However, in recent days, we've placed ourselves in a position of greater and greater social isolation. So social loneliness has gone up. Think about what sort of happened to us since the pandemic and how perhaps you had a social network before that you now communicate with over Zoom or something like that. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Emotional loneliness is the thing that I hear most about, and probably because I'm a therapist, because it's that gut-wrenching feeling of lacking a connection, of lacking an attachment to another human being, of somebody knowing who you are inside and out and loving you anyway, right? Well, when we don't have that, the depth of pain people can experience is really profound. So often our need for emotional connection or attachment comes from our attachment figures. So when we're kids, that's of course going to come from mother and dad, or mother and mother, whoever raises you, you know what I mean. And then of course, as an adult, that's usually transferred on to a spouse, a best friend, and in some cases, even a therapist. So whoever it is, that person that you talk to when you're sort of dying inside, that would be your attachment person. And today we talk more and more about something called existential loneliness. Now, years ago in 73, when Spener was first writing about loneliness, he didn't create this concept, okay? But it sort of combines social and emotional loneliness with a couple of differences. So the social loneliness component is not feeling connected to others. The emotional loneliness is this isolation, emptiness, abandonment. Okay? So why am I here? Why am I waking up every morning? What is the point? I don't feel like anybody really gets me. Times when I've tried to talk with somebody else, they responded to me with invalidation, which made me really sort of gun shy to try again. Excuse me, I'm thinking of sort of a lot of examples of that. So that time you shared with somebody what you were feeling and they used it against you. Okay, so you stopped sharing. You told somebody maybe how depressed you were, and then all of a sudden they're treating you like a sick person, right? They treat you differently, like you're less competent, like you're less capable. Or in the case of somebody who is maybe over identifying or maybe feeling a little competitive with you. I'm thinking about a situation where I shared about sort of that cycle of depression and anxiety. And the person in the room said, well, yes, I used to have that anxiety when I felt like I had to do more and more and be better and better. And you know, when you have those moments where you realize that person really isn't talking about them, but they're sort of making a cheap shot at you or projecting their own experiences onto you. So again, this tendency is to sort of crawl back within ourselves and say, you know what, I'm not going to tell anybody shit. Because if I tell people something, they're going to hurt me. So true loneliness, existential loneliness, also implies sort of a lack of connection to God or source or whatever you call your higher power. Okay. And it's this feeling of sort of being in a group of people, but it doesn't lessen. Okay. I just don't feel connected. Feel like maybe I'm on the outside looking in. That's that existential loneliness. So we are more social than ever before, yet more lonely. So that tells us something really, really powerful, that the method of sociability absolutely impacts the level of intimacy. Okay. So I don't know that we're really craving more sociability as much as we're craving more intimacy. Right. So those real relationships, those relationships where you feel like you can connect with another human being. All you need to do is go on Facebook and you can do all the socializing you want. You can update your brand. You can do whatever you do on Facebook and get your likes and all that kind of stuff. But that really isn't going to fill that void and that emptiness that we're talking about when we're talking about sort of existential loneliness. Okay? That void that maybe you keep trying to fill up with other things, like maybe booze, maybe liquor, maybe gaming, maybe drugs, maybe exercise. I mean, all those things we sort of do to try and fill that void, right? And so what's interesting again is that if it's emotional loneliness, you can't fill that void with socializing. Just like you can't fill the need for social attachment with someone that you're very intimate with, okay? Because they're two different things. And existential loneliness is different as well. That requires sort of a search for a greater meaning, again, maybe an enhanced relationship with your higher power, not just necessarily believing, but in fact, a real relationship. So let's take a second to talk about that. So upwards of 80+% of the population purport to have some idea or notion of God, whatever you call God. Again, source, Buddha, Jesus, whatever you call God. So there's a belief, but is there a relationship? Do you talk to God like you would talk to a friend? Do you feel comfortable sharing with him your pain or her, whatever you believe? Or is God sort of who you go to when you're in a jam? Or this really sort of abstract concept outside of yourself that you have reverence and you worship, but not really a relationship. So that would be some, again, that existential emptiness and loneliness. So why? So there's two major causes, two major things that have gone on over the last few decades. So we do a lot of our communicating through social media now. And that means we're communicating with people we really don't know. Okay. A Facebook friend that you do not know outside of Facebook, you really know nothing about them, right? Because again, you're not posting that fight you had with your husband or the issue your kid's having in school. Or if you are, that's not appropriate either, because again, that's a social construct. You're going to be humiliating your kid or your spouse, right? And so, excuse me, people have a really sort of one-sided view of you. And so that's not a real connection. Okay. And it's rarely face-to-face. Some of you do FaceTime and things like that, which is certainly better, but it's not the full picture. Okay. You know how much you know about another human being by being in their physical presence that you will never tell over this camera, right? You can see the way they carry themselves, the way they smell, when their eyes cast down, when something is bothering them, and maybe you're not going to hear that. Okay. So it is different. We lose a lot in translation. And again, social media has become about selling your brand, not building a relationship. Okay. Chris Rock, in a recent comedy program, I think it was on Netflix, he said that we're addicted to attention, affirmation, likes. That's not a relationship. That's attention. That's attention seeking. That's a want to fill that void, that inner void, with something external to yourself. And of course, the problem with that is that things external to us are always going to fail with time. Or you're going to need more and more to get the same result. We build tolerance just like we do with booze and dope. Though you had 5 likes, that felt really, really good. And now you need 10 likes, now you need 20 likes, and now you need whatever it is in order to get that same sense of validation. But here's the caveat. It's not real validation. Okay. That validation is validating you for your presentation and not necessarily who you are. And those are 2 different things. And that, again, is going to lead to those chronic feelings of emptiness. Okay, so social loneliness, it doesn't really take care of that. You get some of that on Zoom, but certainly not the same thing that you do when you're just sitting next to somebody, when you're engaged in a hobby and you're just talking about silly stuff. Okay, we don't get that. You can't see, hear, or really experience the other person. Again, as a therapist, I got to tell you guys, I've had to do therapy online, and we'll talk more about this in a minute. It's not the same thing. It's not the same experience, and shame on folks propagating that it is the same experience. I get the convenience. I get all those things. I also get that it can be helpful, but is it best practice? No, you miss a lot. You miss so much about energy and engagement, things that you just can't pick up over a camera. Comparing other people's outsides with your insides. So this is, again, a real misnomer. This idea, what we see on social media, of course, is people's outsides, their brand, their advertisement, what they want you to see, not what's going on the inside. So you go in and you look at your social media, you know who you really are on the inside, which is maybe you're experiencing a lot of loneliness. And you go on and you click onto social media and you just see pictures of families, happy families and friends, and all the women are in that side hip pose and, and all that stuff. And again, we're not seeing that they maybe are just as lonely as you are. Social media obviously does not fill the emotional or existential attachment need, because communication is superficial. Okay? And again, that's right. When you put something out there, you don't want to put out your deepest, darkest, because that's not going to be good for your family. That's not appropriate, right? But what's really interesting is keyboard courage, right? So people can be incredibly hostile towards a stranger, which tells you about their real character, right? Maybe they're not hostile face to face because, I don't know, because they have to deal with the consequences of that. But online, they feel free to do that. Okay. So that's not, again, going to be an fulfillment of that good emotional connection. And you're unable to truly know the good news and bad news about someone. Again, because it's not appropriate to post all of your bad news on social media. It's not appropriate to put your life's biggest difficulties. So you're not going to have that same level of intimacy. Hiding flaws and seeking likes, it is of human nature to want to put your best foot forward. Okay, you're not alone in that. And it doesn't promote a higher purpose or meaning. It's all about instant gratification. So, on social media, we had a phase, and I don't know if it's still going on because I'm not on a lot, but where we'd have all these really amazing quotes. And a lot of times people would talk about being empaths and things like that. And all I kept thinking was, who you are on social media is not who you are. Sharing someone's philosophy isn't who you are. You want to talk about your character. Your character is something I can see in your actions and how you treat other human beings. Don't tell me what you believe. Show. Okay, words are pretty empty, guys. But there's a lot of people now who have become so socially isolated, okay, that they think that's who they are. And it's not. Who you are is who you are with your family, within your community. It's not who you purport to be on social media. Okay. And in this, we have this really inherent fear that if you really knew me, you might reject me. Okay, that fear's always been there, by the way, in human beings. It's human nature. That's why you give people a little bit of knowledge about yourself and you don't give them the whole thing all at once, right? Because you want to test them, see if they're going to be hurtful. Number two is much more compelling. So we don't have a walking Photoshop. So if I meet you on the streets, you're going to see me warts and all, and I'm going to see you warts and all, right? And what if I'm not a very attractive person? What if I don't like the way people treat me in the real world? Because you know how we are, you know how the culture is, right? If you're attractive, you're worthwhile, you're worth talking to. But maybe if you're not so attractive, then, and you're shy to boot. Okay, I was thinking about sort of that study with about men who are not experiencing sexual intimacy, and this complaint and idea that, you know, nobody talks to you. Well, you know, you're painfully shy too, because you're feeling insecure. So you get online and you're able to be anybody you want to be. And so if the person on the other end thinks they're talking to a babe, they think they're talking to somebody reputable, okay, how they treat them, their experience of other people is going to be different. And I got to tell you guys, it's got to feel good. You know, we have a lot of those catfishing shows out there, and I've seen a couple of them, and it really broke my heart because the person who was being deceitful was probably a lovely person, okay? But they knew that nobody was going to treat them with that kindness, that attention, that love, and reverence, and all those things that we're all hungry for, because they weren't what society would consider physically attractive. Same thing for men. A man can go online and be anybody he wants to be. And women are going to treat him different based on physicality, based on how much money they think he has. And maybe he has none of those things, but really likes the way people treat him, engage with him when they think he's somebody. And how sad is that? Because we're all somebody. But you get it. I get it. I hear you. I get why this is happening. But the more we dig our heels in, the deeper we go, the less transparent we become, the worse this is going to get, until we get to a place where we're going to have our dates, I guess, virtually, because you fell in love with an image. Maybe we're going to have to sleep together virtually. Well, hell, that goes on sometimes in, what is that, that Second Life thing. Okay. So we're getting further and further away from each other. Telling people how I truly feel face to face is scary. Online, it's easy. I can block and or unfriend the consequences. So guys, when you get into it with somebody face to face, what keeps your mouth shut, or at least keeps you tempered? It's the fact you're going to have to see this fool tomorrow, right? Say it's a colleague at work. So you might, I don't know, establish a boundary, say something along the lines of, oh, I really didn't like what you just said, but you're probably not going to tell them to F off right there. Okay. And again, it's because you know that regardless of how you feel about this person, you got to deal with them tomorrow, right? So you're going to have to learn to deal with that. Well, online, you don't have to. I don't like you. I don't like the way you talk to me. You don't think like I do. And of course, our political posts are the nastiest, nastiest things in the world. Okay? If you're posting those nasty things and you are attributing that to God and religion and Christianity, you're barking up the wrong tree. Okay. That's not what God calls us to be. Okay. So you don't have to solve relational problems, just block them. Or my personal favorite is when somebody does that passive aggressive post on Facebook and then pretends like it's not about you, right? It's just a coincidence that 2 seconds ago, you two just had an argument about that very same thing. Okay. How cowardly. Passive aggressive BS, right? You will exploit me. And the truth is, if you're vulnerable, there's a high likelihood of that. We have, I was going to say a nation of predators, but the truth is we have a world of predators. And vulnerability for some people is something to be exploited. But here's the thing. You're going to catch it a lot sooner in face-to-face relationships, okay? There's a couple things that is required. Number one, impulse control. A lot of us adult folk are demonstrating the impulse control of a 13-year-old who's found his father's gun, okay? We blast people, insulting, mean, and cowardly, okay? So face-to-face relationships, if you want to have them, they're going to require some impulse control. They're going to require negotiations. Now, I want to tell you guys something in this. Did you know that Republicans and Democrats used to be able to be friends and like have barbecues together, and people weren't taking cheap shots at each other across the table and presenting the most absurd version of their belief system that they don't even subscribe to? We used to have something called maturity. We used to be able to say, well, I don't agree with your point of view. I know that we're more similar than we are different. And guess what? While we're having this barbecue and swimming in the pool with our kids and stuff, it ain't about politics. It's about enjoying a friendship. And that's how we also know, by the way, that we're more alike than different. And when we know that, we're profoundly less hostile, profoundly less afraid. Okay. You have to give and take in relationships, face to face, and not always on your terms, right? Ever since we got a cell phone, now we can decide if we want to even answer the phone based on who it is. Okay. So what if sometimes we have to do things on other people's terms? That's the risk of a face-to-face relationship. Okay. Somebody might come to your house at an odd hour and need something from you. Somebody might call you and need something from you when they need it from you. Inconvenient, yes, but part of a relationship. Risk of rejection. Again, face-to-face rejection is much more profound because, again, what's being rejected is a much more authentic version of ourselves. Being mindful of other people's needs and schedules, so it's not just about you. Okay, the other big hard hitter that occurred, why we are a jacked up little lonely society, was the pandemic. Okay, now I understand why a lot of these things happen. So as I share with you, the consequences, I'm in no way suggesting that I know better or we should have done different. I mean, I don't know. Nobody knew what to do. But I can tell you there's been consequences. So the greater social isolation, never having to leave your house, your safety zone. I don't have to go out and deal with the big bad world. I don't have to deal with traffic. I don't have to deal with annoying people, except on a really limited basis. And guess what? I don't even have to show my face. How many meetings do you go to at work where people's screens are blanked out? That's not engagement. I know I can do 20 things when my screen is off. Okay. And it isn't that I'm not listening to you, but I certainly am not fully engaged. Okay. We learned to work from school, or to do school and work from home. It was a disaster, but we learned to do it. And you might not be surprised, but we have a ton of kids coming in now who are having a hell of a time acclimating back to regular school. So they learned that they no longer had to negotiate with other kids. They no longer had to deal with bullying, which, by the way, I hate bullying too. But guess what? Learning how to cope with those kind of things are the things that make you strong and resilient later in life, because there's always going to be a bully. You can't just go home and close your door, right? Well, apparently you can. Fear of exposure to the disease from being around people, that was legitimate, right? We're all scared. And even holidays were spent alone. So those things that were sacred to us were interrupted. Okay. At least in theory it was. I know my family spent the holidays together anyway. We prayed and made a decision to do it anyway. So consequences. So we got comfortable being alone. Being alone is comfortable. It's kind of like having a relationship with your dog. Okay, your dog is fabulous. Your dog doesn't require anything of you. Okay, and not having to cope with other people. I got back on that freeway. God help me. Oh, gosh. It seemed like it was worse than it was before. But the truth is, I just got used to not having to deal with traffic. And by the way, the other people on the freeway, they got used to not dealing with me. Okay. Increased social phobia or fear of negative evaluation. So we became out of practice with our social skills. And the more out of practice you are with something, the more anxious you become about doing it again. And yet it's that very anxiety that might propel you to stay isolated in your house. Okay. Not wanting to take risks or make an effort. Excuse me, it's easy to not deal with people. And I know that somebody out there right now is doing cost benefit analysis and saying, you know what, Olson, I've seen the costs. I would rather be at home with my video games, with my social universe, than deal with other human beings. And I get you, I get that. The problem is the more disconnected you become, the worse off you're going to be. It's going to take some time, but with minimal social interaction, okay, human beings are social creatures, the worse your depression and your anxiety you're going to get. Not because of pathology, but because of human nature. Now we lack relationship skills. Boy, you know, it used to be, or at least it seemed the case, that we handled relationships so much better. So I want to take you back like decades ago when, you know, folks sort of stayed in the same neighborhoods and they had block parties and things like that. There was always like one person in the neighborhood who was a jerk. And they used to, there usually was one or two people at least that were alcoholics, and all the kids knew it. All the other parents knew it, and we all dealt with each other. Okay. We didn't get to block them. We just had to deal with each other. You probably didn't like spend a lot of time with the neighborhood guy who was practicing alcoholic, but you had to tolerate him or her. Okay. You had to learn to deal with it. And in fact, maybe you even had to hone your relationship skills a little bit. Maybe you got to know that person a little bit and realized what it was that they in fact liked talking about, right? Maybe somebody was drinking their trauma from the war away, And maybe they got a lot out of talking with you about the war. Everybody else in the group might roll their eyes, but you still had some level of sociability. Our social skills stink. Look online. Adults argue like children. And things get so personal and provocative over a difference of opinion. That's not good social skills. That's immaturity. Only the weakest of debater resorts to personal attacks when they're losing their argument. And yet it seems to be commonplace. Okay, without face-to-face contact, the likelihood of truly intimate communication is minimal. Again, intimacy is when I know the good news and the bad news about you, and I like you anyway. And we are more divided and more distant from each other than ever before. You know, there was a little joke in a movie called Death Becomes Her, and Bruce Willis's character says to his wife, "What about the neighbors?" And Meryl Streep's character says, "In the 10 years we've been in LA, have you ever seen a neighbor?" I mean, it's profound to me how many of us don't know our neighbors. Okay, that certainly wasn't the case in the Midwest where I grew up. Okay, so it's a theory, okay? And I'm just putting it out there because I too have questions and concerns about where we're going. And I recognize some things that happened to us because of the pandemic, okay? So pre-pandemic, I don't know that anybody would have really argued for anybody K through 12 doing school from home, okay? And I will share with you as a professor, I didn't like online schooling at all. And there was some of that going on, but it was progressing. So check this out. So when it first started in the 90s, there would be some classes online that were general education stuff, right? Your Englishes, your sciences, and things like that. I didn't like it then because so much of what I got out of school came from interactions with the teacher. Okay. And I felt like I was getting graded on my ability to teach myself, right? And there's so many things in textbooks that simply do not translate, or you at least need like an adjunct perspective to it about how things really work. So I hated it. And then despite hating it, and the assurances that we were all given that it was just going to be for those general education classes. Well, pretty quickly then it started being for upper level classes. So you could get your bachelor's degree without ever having to step foot in a classroom. Now, that's a couple of things to be said about that. First and foremost, that means maybe you did none of the work to earn your degree. Maybe you did, okay? I'm just saying that the possibility of that increases profoundly. That means that you were never challenged, that you never engaged in role play, that you never had to do group projects. Excuse me. And when I say role playing, that's incredibly important to me because I teach therapists, okay? What they're saying in the book is one thing. Having somebody sit in front of you and challenging you and being able to see yourself and how you respond to challenge, that's necessary. That's necessary for a quality education, but nevertheless, we were going that direction before the pandemic. But that forced us right over the top, right? So nobody was going to school face to face. Working from home, which would have been all but unheard of in many, many professions, all of a sudden was commonplace. Okay. And boy, people got used to that quick, right? Not having to commute, being able to work in your sweats. In between appointments, you could throw in a load of laundry. Those of you that have little ones at home, I'm sure that helped considerably. And there are certain professions where that's fine, but let's get real. It's not optimal in most cases. So everybody got used to this thing, right? And then we began to rationalize the continued practice of it even after it was over. And some of the glaring places that I see this, the online physicians. Guys, what's the first thing your doctor does? Well, it's usually his nurse, his or her nurse. Okay, they take your blood pressure, they take your weight, they take your temperature before you even go in and see the doctor. They're getting a baseline, okay, about your health. That gives you this baseline vitals do. And if you had bronchitis, what would your doctor do? Why, he or she would listen to your lungs to see what was going on. Okay. Now you're reporting symptoms online. Think about the things that can get missed. And again, I get the convenience. Believe me, I'm a crazy working person too, right? I get the convenience part of that. But is it best practice? Give me a break. How about therapy? Okay. Again, I shared with you guys earlier, I did phone sessions during the pandemic. I did some Zoom sessions, and while Zoom was better than phone, it still wasn't optimal, right? Because everybody's in their little itty bitty safe space, right? I'm not sitting in the room with you. I'm not sitting across from you. I don't get the nuances of you. I don't catch your energy. There's going to be things I miss even about your gestures. And while I get the convenience, please don't sell me on this idea that it's best practice. And that's what they're doing. And by the way, that's not different by other industry practices. When they were sort of transitioning, when the HMOs were taking over healthcare and had to sell everyone on this idea that more dynamic therapies were not as good, not as effective as behavioral therapies, they started putting out a lot of studies where the measurement would occur, right, after like 4 to 6 weeks. Well, after 4 to 6 weeks, behaviorism is always going to look better, right? But see that same person 6 months to a year from now without addressing underlying causes, you got a whack-a-mole board with all the guys coming out, okay? But it sold the idea, right? We could create propaganda to state that this is a good thing, okay? And again, I don't mind human beings having a choice about how they receive services. That's fine. But let's not pretend that we're doing this for the patient. We're doing this for us because it's convenient for us. Okay. Online shopping. That was going on before the pandemic, but boy, right? Even great grandma and grandpa, they got an Amazon account now too. And what an amazing thing that is. They don't have to have a store. They don't have the overhead of a store. They don't have the utility bills. They don't have nearly the amount of staff you have to have in a brick and mortar store. And they are thriving. So prior to the pandemic, many of us were resistant to doing things online, and for very good reason. And then the pandemic forced us to learn to accept it regardless. And now it's normal. Okay. We may not like it, but we're not necessarily going to fight it like we used to. Okay. Again, brick and mortar buildings are expensive. And I don't think we can be so naive as to not recognize that in a capitalistic culture, money rules. Okay. And so I cannot help but think that there's a lot of string pulling going on behind the scenes on this one. Okay. And at the end of the day, it's neither here nor there. I'm not an economist. I'm certainly not a conspiracy theorist. This is just common sense to me. The more isolated we are, the easier we are to control. Let me say that again. The more isolated we are, the easier we are to control, because we're not getting alternative perspectives and viewpoints. We are being fed viewpoints that confirm our own biases. What's a confirmation bias? Well, that's when you only pay attention to information that supports your theory and you dismiss information that doesn't. In fact, when people get information that challenges their current thinking, instead of rethinking their theory, they tend to double down on it. And the more isolated we remain, the greater this is going to be. Choices and consequences. Well, guys, it's still up to us. Okay, we're not going to stop it. We are going to have social media. There are these things, but we still have a voice and a say about how far this goes. We can make a decision to participate in socializing, even or especially if you don't want to. So most people don't want to go to the gym and exercise, but they do it because the consequences of not doing it are worse than choosing to do it. In fact, they usually find benefit in time. We need to hone in our social skills again, truly listening to others as opposed to waiting for our turn to speak. Part of us losing our social skills was losing our ability to listen. Okay. And I think it's because everybody is so hungry to be heard. It's powerful. People are aching to be heard. Instead of pouting, unfriending, or blocking, or making a passive aggressive post, call the person and work through it. But you got to make a decision to do this if we want things to improve. But if you don't care about things improving, excuse me, I apologize, I have allergies. This is going to continue to get worse, but maybe make a decision to do it different. And people are not interchangeable or disposable, right? But they are interchangeable and disposable online now, aren't they? Couple of relationships, a handful of relationships. Let's really work with those. So your world is bigger than your immediate circle. So keeping that in mind, that again, especially with regard to your social media circle, okay? There's things going on in the world that are powerful and profound. And again, staying sheltered in our little houses, we don't have to go out to go to work. We don't have to see. It becomes dehumanizing. And it's a concern. Okay, the consequences, we have increased division and tribalism. You see that politically. Increased homelessness and social issues because the mainstream are disconnected from anyone outside their circle. You're in your house, you're comfy, okay? And isn't it interesting that the homeless are probably more socially connected than you are, okay? They can't, if they get into an argument with the dude down the street, they can't kick him out. They can't block him and unfriend him. Okay, they're going to have to work it out because they're a community. Okay, so wouldn't that be interesting if at the end of the day, the homeless become an example of positive social skills, right? Because they're the only ones that are talking to each other. Our thinking is defined by media. So I'm going to ask you to do something that I do, and I do this at the gym. And it works really well. They've always got one TV that's got CNN going, and they have another TV that's got Fox going. So I watch half and half. I do an hour of cardio. I watch a half hour of Fox and a half hour of CNN. And guess what? You hear the exact same story from very different perspectives. But you know what? The more I do that, the more I understand why your perspective is the way it is. And why my perspective is the way it is. I become a social creature again. I become somebody who can socialize with people who have a difference of opinion and understand and honor where you come from. We need to find greater cause or charity. Again, if we're stuck in our house, having that existential argument becomes really, really big, right? Because you can't just live for you. The world is so much bigger than you. And the smaller your world is, the more lonely, the more afraid, the more bigoted, the more isolated you're going to become. Force yourself up and out. The beauty of being up and out and doing something for somebody else is it gets you out of your own head and reconnects you to your humanity, but that's a choice. So I need to let you know that without change, the loneliness is going to consume us if it hasn't already, and ultimately destroy us. You see it getting worse and worse, guys. Okay? I'm concerned. I have a beautiful granddaughter, and I'm not really sure what the world is going to look like 20 years from now, or even 10 years from now. And I'm concerned about tablet time and social media and all these things and the potential impact on her. So the best that I can do, right, is work towards something bigger and better. And if most of us are willing to make a difference, are willing to do it afraid, are willing to connect with people, we might not lose what we have ever so quickly. I thank you so much for your time. And remember, at the end of the day, guys, human beings are social creatures. There's no way around that. And the more we continue to defy this, the greater our loneliness and the greater our existential crisis. So thank you so much for connecting with me. I want to wish you the best. I'm hoping that you got something out of this and that maybe you'll be willing to try and connect, to make that effort. I thank you and God bless you.